All right, well, it is 12 o'clock on the dot, so welcome everyone to the fourth in a series of 101 Open Stories as part of Year of Open with the great support of our partner, the OE Consortium. My name is Jenny Heyman, and I am a proud member of the GoGN Graduate Network and working with a small team on this 101 Open Stories project, and really have had so much fun this week hearing people's stories about more or less, how the heck did you come to be an open advocate? What was your path to this? And so I would like to start alphabetically with introductions with our guests. Terry Green is joining us, but seems to be offline at the moment. Hopefully he'll be back soon, but we'll start with Helen, just a quick introduction.
Hi, I'm Helen DeWard. I teach the Faculty of Education here in Central Ontario, and my passion is storytelling, digital storytelling, and media production. So I'm really happy to be able to share some stories today.
All right, great, super. And Christina Hendricks from out in BC.
Yes, I'm Christina Hendricks. I teach philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So I'm on the West Coast. And the other thing that I do these days, I just got appointed as the Deputy Academic Director for the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology. That's a mouthful at the University of British Columbia. So
right,
yeah,
great.
my work in Open, I think, will connect with that.
Thanks, Christina. And David, let's go with you.
Hi, I'm David Porter. I'm CEO at eCampus Ontario, originally from British Columbia and in British Columbia this morning on vacation, but heading back to Ontario next week.
And hopefully Terry Green will be joining us. I think his internet is a little kind of challenging this morning, but he's at Fleming College, and I'll get him to introduce himself when he starts storytelling perhaps. So maybe we'll start with you, Helen, and if you just want to start sharing your story with us, that would be great.
So this was a particular challenge for me when you first invited me to kind of talk about how I became an open educator. I ended up going down this rabbit hole of reflection for a while. And ultimately, when I ask my students to tell their stories and come up with their stories, they find it really challenging to figure out where the beginning, the middle, and the end might be, how to craft it into a narrative that makes sense for themselves. So that's what I was trying to do. And I realized that there is no beginning or ending with this open education story for me. I was born and raised on a farm. So for me, it really started with, being part of that open culture, living in the open, growing things in the open. The seasons mattered, time to just get out and play with my siblings. That I called it Imagineering, that sense of exploration and tinkering and playing in the open. Ultimately comes from that deep roots of being a farm girl. Becoming a teacher, my background is as a primary teacher, and then moved into school leadership, administration, and then took the step into teaching in the higher ed in the Faculty of Education. I think back on kind of the way I started teaching really was in an open way. It was the early onset of computers in the classroom, the early onset of internet access, and I really connected to Penny's conversation yesterday about the dial-up squeal and finding yourself on the internet and talking to people you've never talked to before. So ultimately, it was another step towards open for me. And then, with that increase of computers in the classroom really meant that I looked for ways to open the classroom doors and windows for the students that I was teaching, particularly the exceptional learners, those who were disenfranchised, those who were marginalized, those who had doors closed to them a lot of time, and really finding ways for them to connect and have conversations with people that mattered in their lives, and using the internet and using publishing beyond just the classroom material. And you're not publishing for me, you're publishing for somebody else. So again, another little step to that whole open access education that Martin Weller talked about. And then I have to say the next step was my mountain climbing. I've climbed the one mountain. If you look at pictures of Machu Picchu and you see the mountain behind, that's always in every picture. I've climbed that mountain twice, but I connected it to, I've gained educational experience twice by doing 2 master's programs. And the second master's program kind of was on the groundwork based on the groundwork of the first master's that I did. And the Masters of Ed Tech from UBC really was the catalyst for what I'm now doing as an open educator. It pushed and coerced me. I gained confidence. My final project was called My Renovations. And because I was doing renovations in real life, it became my renovation, how I became renovated by doing the coursework and the content and the activities through the MET program. And then I started pushing myself even further because I started teaching at the university, Faculty of Education, and I wanted to model and share and be an advocate for my own students. So the more I wanted to teach about open and to have them become open educators, I had to model it, so I had to step out. So I started blogging more regularly, frequently, and I think I really liked the connections that a few other people made about that one moment when somebody paid attention to what they were talking about. And for me, it was Alan Levine, who responded to a blog post I did entitled Me in Media. And I was really struggling with this notion of who I was in open digital spaces. So he responded with a whole, his comment is a blog post in itself. And at the time I was using Alan's DS106 and all that open stuff that he was doing. And Alan Levine, oh my God, Alan Levine commented on my blog post. So it's that same experience that a few others have talked about, their go-to person or somebody that really paid attention to it. So I'm really conscious of doing that now for my teacher candidates, for people that I see are new to open spaces. I'm making a point of responding to them in some way and encouraging that affirmation and encouragement that we need to take the next steps and be comfortable where we are. So when I started teaching at the faculty, I made a commitment intentionally to put my coursework in the open. I dual layer all the courses that I teach, and they're within the learning management system. So the students who are not comfortable in the open have a place to and a way to share and connect. And then those who are ready to go to the open space is there. So each of the courses are dual layered. All the courses are on open websites, and the courses iterate and change as I teach the courses each year. So the pages change. So I tell my students, yes, you can come back and find whatever you want, or all the stuff is still there, but it may not be exactly the same. The content will necessarily change. I've revamped the initial course that I did was Digital Teaching and Learning. It's been revamped. I moved it from a WordPress to a Weebly site. I'm now doing an online course called Critical Digital Literacy that is, again, web-based, but I also have the back-end secure space in learning management, and they really mirror each other. So I've iterated the course designs as I go. But when I finished the MET program and I graduated, I started looking for what next. And that's when I call it my year of MOOC. I became MOOCified. I went and MOOCed all over the place. Rhizo, Digital Pedagogy MOOC, CL MOOC, Human MOOC, and then there's the Design Thinking MOOC. So there were a whole pile of different kind of experiences for open learning. And that's how I got connected to Creative Commons and to Virtually Connecting. So those are the communities, spaces that I continue to share and collaborate in. And then this year, it's nice to see becoming part of the OEO Rangers group that I think is going to kind of open things in Ontario. So it's a core group of people who will celebrate, advocate, model, share in open spaces, and I'm really excited to be part of that. Network, communication, collaboration, all those really neat things that we want for ourselves and for our students. So when I was preparing for today, this story, I went to Martin Weller's book, Battle for Open, and chapter 2 really just jumped out at me. So I started just thinking, what are my motivations for open? And ultimately, it's not necessarily for me, but for my students. And modeling and being able to risk and to jump into open spaces and look at what it'll mean for them in terms of their professional practice. As teachers in the world today, they really do need to be connected. They do need to be collaborating. They do need to be engaged in inquiry in their professional practice, and that doesn't end when they leave my classroom or graduate to go into the field. So that this is kind of like their sandbox space for me. So that's why I do it, so that they can see the risks and rewards, gain professional identity, understand copyright and the student safety and security. Those types of things. So my story doesn't have a beginning or an end. Obviously, it's an ongoing story. It's not necessarily the never-ending story, but as I say, there's always another mountain to climb, and I'm sure that there are people that I'm going to be climbing with.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thank you so much, Helen. So just to confirm, Helen, your students are Ontario pre-service teachers. Is that correct? So they're going to teach in the PK-12 system here in Ontario, likely?
Yes. So they're pre-service. It's now a 2-year program. The courses I teach are elective courses or concurrent ed courses. And you can find them. I'll put the blog link in, and you can link to the course content. Don't bet that it's, who was it? Peter was saying, no, it was, somebody was saying that OER goes to repository to die.
I think it was Nicola Pallet.
Nicola. This is that case.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen.
These are recreated each year. So the pre-service teachers.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Helen. Terry, we're going to surprise you by asking you to go next alphabetically. And we're sorry we missed you in the round of introductions, but please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi, my name's Terry Green. I'm a learning technology specialist at Fleming College, which has campuses in Junior Nails. This is Alice, by the way. Say hi. Fleming College has campuses in Peterborough, Lindsay, Haliburton, and a small one in Cobourg in Ontario. And okay, so my story. I took I have a Bachelor of Education in Elementary Ed from the University of Alberta. Then doing that made me realize that I love to educate and teach, but I wasn't the little kids teaching kids wasn't what I wanted to do. I realized in the end, so I moved out to Toronto and I took a teaching certificate, ESL teaching certificate, grad certificate at George Brown College, and I started to teach at George Brown after I finished, and I really enjoyed teaching adults. But I was still wanting to continue my education. Okay. Anyway, so I was still looking for what did I want to learn in my own educational career path. And I didn't know what instructional design was until I saw an ad for a program in instructional design at the University of North Dakota. I see that. and it was fully online, so I could continue to, it was online, but live online. And it started in the evening, so I could continue to work as a teacher, or whatever I was doing at the time, and go to school at night, or yeah, take the class at night. Sorry, I'm getting lost to where I'm talking about here. Anyway, so it was live online. It wasn't open yet. I didn't know anything about open yet, but I started a master's degree in about 2009 in instructional design and technology, because I really enjoy the creating of educational spaces and things and stuff. And in that program, nobody ever mentioned open or anything, but can you hear me?
Hi, Terry. Yep.
Hi. What was the last thing that you heard me say?
Something about ed tech, masters.
Okay, so I was working on a master's of instructional design. Nobody at the University of North Dakota, no talk about open yet, but they were great at building learning community in all their courses. And they always talked about it. This is very important, build a community. And that was one of the huge things I took away from the program, was that there's so much benefit to thinking about and crafting community in your courses and programs. So that was a big takeaway. So after that degree, I started looking for work in the field, and I was lucky enough to land the job at Fleming College, and I started to work there, and doing that. And then ultimately, after a few years, I'm getting to the open part now. Can you hear me now still?
Yeah, it's a little freezy now and again, but it's okay so far,
I
Terry.
think I'm low.
Come on, internet. Hmm.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Terry. Back again.
Sorry. Okay, I'll wrap this up as quick as I can. Okay, so I have a blog post that describes this entire story, just so you know,
Great.
on my post on my domain called learningnuggets.ca, and I think you'll share that. So it's all there.
Great.
It's telling me it's unstable. Can you hear me right now?
Yep. Maybe try without the video, Terry, and see if just the audio is easier on your internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Stop video. Okay, I stopped the video, but can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so when I get cut off again, just so you know, learningnuggets.ca has a blog post which tells this exact story. My post is called Things Open, because you asked me to describe how we got into Things Open. So one day I'm asked to go to my boss's office and talk about my performance review, and she asked me to find something. What do you want to do for professional development? And I had looked around and found, it's been mentioned a few times, DS 106.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't looking for anything open, or I was just looking for kind of free online, and it fit really well because I figured I could learn a whole bunch of stuff about how to brush up on my digital skills in whatever area. So it looked cool. So I suggested it to my boss, and she said, go ahead and try it. And I didn't really know what it was about it that I thought was so interesting until later. And now I realize it's because on the site, you don't just see what they say you should do. You see the work of the participants everywhere. So I'm like, I can see what other people are going to do with these instructions. I can take their ideas and run with them in my own direction. I might be able to see my own stuff up there. It was so cool and motivating. I could even suggest new activities. I can be a fundamental piece of this whole thing. That's so motivating and so inspiring. And I've kind of just run from there with all their ideas in everything I do. So from there, and through the people that are participating in DS106 has brought me to, first of all, just basically develop an awesome network of people, a professional learning network on Twitter. I could ask Helen, you mentioned Alan Levine, like all these open superheroes that I can tweet, ask questions, and get their ideas immediately anywhere in the world is like, I don't know how we put a price on that. That's amazing. I can't remember specifically what brought me through this to virtually connecting. I know it's probably Helen somehow. I don't know how we connected Helen, but through you, I came to virtually connecting, and that's just like DS106, this great platform to connect with open thinkers around the world. That it overlaps big time with DS106, the people involved, but I can get to be involved with all these conferences that around the world that I otherwise had no idea about or be involved with. Last year I was able to go to the Open Education Conference in Virginia. This year I won't be able to make it, but I know I'll be able to do virtually connecting and feel like a big part of it regardless, even if I'm not leaving my hometown to go. So virtually connect, like DS106 brought me to that. Let me figure out, I'm just checking my blog post to see where I am in my story. Oh, that's the other thing I learned through that, like Helen mentioned, the blogging for yourself, which I only started because DS106 told me to. But from there, it's so enriching of your professional life to take what you're doing in your day-to-day job and write about it, and you reflect on it, and it makes you think hard about your process and reflect on how you do things differently the next time. And yeah, do it because I'm told to. And it's so, it plays on your ego in a good way, I think, that you put your stuff out there and you see people seeing your stuff and reading it and connecting to it. It feels great. And also, if you are doing it, you might inspire other people to do it, and you might get to see their ideas, and it kind of rises the tide for everybody, I think. And another kind of great benefit of the easing your way into open is that you get to take before you give. You can go and see what's out there in open, and you can take and take and take, and eventually it'll help you build the confidence that what you have is worth giving to. It's kind of like growing up, you get birthday presents, you get Christmas presents, you get presents given, but eventually you start to give back yourself. You can do that with open. So I kind of like that. You're always going to be able to take more than you give because there's so much great stuff out there. And also that, in all that, and I don't like, same with virtually connecting, I can't remember where I got keyed into Creative Commons. It's all just part of the whole big puzzle, but that's been so nice too, to be able to contribute to something and take from it as well. So anyway, Creative Commons, another big, lovely piece of the puzzle. What else is open? Oh, I'm one of, how many, David? 100 open Ontario Open Education Rangers? How many
Yes.
of us are there?
I would say actually maybe about 80 right at the moment, Terry. We're always looking for more. And I forgot to mention in my introduction that.
Okay, I'm still waiting for my, right. I'm waiting for my mule or my horse to show up so I can. So there's three of us here. Jenny, do you count as an open ranger?
I do. It's possible that I've been assigned to be the sheriff.
Yeah, I've been deputizing. I just deputize people into the movement wherever. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but might as well.
You bet.
Which is, it's just fun to be a part of that community. Like back to my, back to my master's degree where they talked about community so much. It's like open is the key to community building and even culture building of this great open sharing life. It's great. So one other little silly thing that has come to me through open is I am the unofficial hander-outer of crap badges, which are poorly drawn, low production value, personal created badges for people, usually through Twitter, that I hand out just based on random acts of awesomeness. So it's kind of my little thing is when I see someone do something kind of neat, I use the snipping tool. I snip a piece of my screen that's just bare and draw a terribly drawn badge and tweet it to them, and they seem to like them. And it started after visiting the Open Education Conference in Richmond last year. My reflective blog post that I made when I got home, I handed out a badge to one of the presenters I had seen there because it was called the F-bomb badge because he dropped the F word in the middle of a presentation, and this guy was a student. I admired his moxie, and just the delivery of the F word in a professional presentation was just made me laugh so hard. So I gave him the F-bomb badge, and I used a really poorly drawn, my very poor skills, not even as high tech as MS Paint. I used the snipping tool, and from there I've been the hander-outer of crap badges, and that's kind of my fun thing that I like to do through open education. But other than that, like I'm forgetting one huge piece of the puzzle is that from the Open Ed conference, I was inspired by Robin DeRosa and her co-creation of a textbook with her students to do that for open ed, higher ed pedagogy. So it's called the Open Faculty Patch Book, and two people on this panel here have written patches. Half of them are by Fleming College faculty and even a technologist, and the other half are from Egypt, Maha and a bunch of her colleagues, and a few in the States. And over Ontario, we've created a kind of informal how to teach in higher ed textbook written by each other for each other, and it's about to be published into a paper copy that we will send to everybody who wrote one, and have a few extra to hand out. And we're definitely handing them out to our new faculty starting in the fall to say, hey, we wrote a textbook for you about how to do this. And it's going to be an ongoing project. New patches can pop up any day on the WordPress site, but then we move them into a press books on a regular basis into publishing them into books or manuals, which has been a pretty pretty awesome project. The last one that came out was especially great by Chuck Pearson. It's had 700, 800 hits because it's such a great description of how to have empathy in your teaching. If you haven't read it, go have a look. It's called Just Listen on the Open Faculty Patch Book. I'll share the list, and Helen's is fantastic, and Jenny's is fantastic. They're all so great, and they're all so different looks at how to teach. And if it wasn't for the kind of tenets of open education, this resource wouldn't exist for all of us. And I think it's going to be a great resource moving forward. And I think that might be plenty of story for me.
That's a really
I
great
hope you've been
round.
able to hear me.
Yep. Yeah, the audio is perfect, Terry. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm very glad that you remembered about the faculty patch book, because it's really a beautiful project. And also, I think creativity seems to be a huge driver for you, and I deeply appreciate that in your spirit of just go out there and try it and draw any way you can. So thank you for sharing your story, and we're going to move on to Christina next.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
I've connected with all of you in one way or another through my open work. And so I'm just going to try to hit some of the highlights, because somebody had said in the chat that Terry had blogged about it and Helen had blogged about it, and I thought, oh, that's such a great idea. I should write a blog post about my story about how I got into all this, because I don't know, it might be interesting to some people, and if nothing else, it'll help me remember forever. So I did take some notes, but they're not in a nice blog post yet. So like I said, I'm at UBC in Vancouver, and I didn't know anything about open until I got here. So I got here in 2004. And before that, I just was teaching philosophy in a sort of, way that I was taught, which is just in a regular closed kind of course. And when I got here, I don't know, around the mid 2000s, after, maybe 2005, 2006, Brian Lamb was teaching at the Center for Teaching and Learning here. And he's the one who got me into, or helped me understand, Creative Commons licenses and wikis and blogs. So he did a number of workshops here on all of those things. And so it was really around 2005, 2006 that I started getting into open to some degree. And I started a blog in 2006. I had to go back and look at my very first blog post, and it was 2006. So that's, that was a little tiny step, for anybody to listen, but it was great as a reflective piece. And then I think things didn't really take off for me with open until I had my year of MOOCing, which was like Helen did. Mine was in 2013. I was on sabbatical. I've tried to do MOOCs since then in the middle of my job, and I don't do a very good job of it. But when I was on sabbatical, I really got into doing a few of them. My first one was ET MOOC, or Educate for People, and I do not remember them all. And I'm kind of like Terry, where I know a whole bunch of people now in the open movement, and I don't remember how I connected with them. And many of them were through ETMOOC or ET MOOC, but I just don't remember who was with what. But I know that Alec Kuros was a big part of ETMOOC, and Ellen Levine was also part of that as well. So his name comes up quite a bit. I took that in January 2013 to March. Then I sort of had this, in that we had a whole section on open education. So it was a MOOC that had different kinds of themes around educational technology, and one of them was open education. I think Audrey Waters was speaking during that one as well. And it just kind of sparked something in me. I thought, oh, right, yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about, Creative Commons and wikis and blogs. I mean, I'm blogging, but something just kind of fit to me with the idea of being open as an educator. So right after that, Martin Weller at the Open University in the UK was offering a course on open education. It was through the Open University, so it had OU students, but it was also open to anybody else. So I was moving through that along with people who were officially registered in the course. So that one was all about open education. I took that and I learned quite a bit more there and connected with some more people. Again, I can't remember who all was in that and who was elsewhere. And then, you know, you're going to hear the same story, I suppose, from a lot of people in the open education movement. Then I took DS 106, which digital storytelling 106 is kind of all about using digital technologies, using films, videos, images, drawing to tell stories, basically. And Jim Groom was running that version. Alan Levine was a big part of that as well. And I met quite a few people through that. I then connected with Creative Commons to some degree through what was then called, and I'm not sure it still exists in this guise, peer-to-peer university. So peer-to-peer university was a sort of platform for people to put on their own open courses. And Creative Commons had what they called a School of Open at peer-to-peer university. So I worked with them, a few people in Creative Commons, and somebody else who wasn't part of Creative Commons, but just like me, kind of interested. We put together an open online course called Why Open, which ran in 2014 and 2015 during the summer. So through these early kinds of things, I just made, I guess this is kind of the key. You just connect with people in the open education movement, and then things sort of start to take off, right? You can do it through taking open online courses. You can do it through, well, virtually connecting, which I just recently got connected to, which is a group of people who find ways for those who can't attend conferences to attend them virtually. I mean, you're not always able to actually attend the sessions, but you're able to connect with people who are at the conference and talking about what's going on at the conference. And that's huge. It doesn't feel exactly like you're there, but the thing for me that's most useful about it is you get to find out what, you know, kind of the talk is or what the new projects are that are happening at the conference. But maybe probably even more valuable than that to me is connecting with people. So I've met quite a few people through virtually connecting that I wouldn't have otherwise. So to me, I mean, if you want to get into, you know, open education, if you want to kind of do more, and involve yourself in more projects, find a way to connect with people around the world virtually, through virtually connecting or otherwise. Twitter has been really huge for me as well. There's a big open education network on Twitter that you can link up to. And what I did is I just found people that I had shared interests with, and I saw who they were following or who was following them, you know, and then you kind of snowball out. So that worked really well. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning. What I do now at my own university is in my classes. So I teach philosophy, and kind of like Helen, I've got the open layer of my courses. My courses are on a WordPress site. Each of them have their own WordPress site. And then there's also a little bit that's on the closed LMS in case students want to do that. Although I have very little on the closed LMS. If they don't want to put anything publicly on our course website, then they just submit it to me separately, or, you know. I share most of my teaching resources openly with a Creative Commons license, almost everything, except for my exams, because, you know, sometimes I want to reuse those. I do a number of videos for my courses, so those are all up on YouTube. And then, so that's teaching. At my university, I kind of became, partly because I was blogging, literally because I was blogging about all this stuff, I became sort of one of the main open faculty at the university because I was out there, right? They knew what I was doing. So I got invited to do presentations and workshops. I got invited to join this, what we call our open pack, which is a group of people at our university that includes students, faculty, staff from the Teaching and Learning Center, and librarians. And we get together once a month and we work on open stuff at the university. We put together a website, we talk about events, we think about what kinds of awareness raising we need to do, advocacy. So that has been a fantastic group. I highly recommend working with students. The students at UBC, and I'm sure it's true in a lot of places, have gotten so much more done than we would have been able to do on our own through the student government. They have a big voice. So work with students. And now I'm Deputy Academic Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I just started in this position, so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I will continue working on open issues at the university through that, and maybe have you in a bigger voice based on that, which could be useful. What am I doing now? I'm working on, well, quite a few things, but one big thing is an open textbook project. So I'm working with the Rebus Foundation, which is a new foundation run by a few people, but that includes Hugh McGuire from Pressbooks. They've gotten some grant money to work on open textbooks, and it's been really great so far. So it's an open textbook in the Introduction to Philosophy, and it's a huge project because we're collecting people from all around the world to each write a small section that's going to become this really big open textbook. We have part editors for each different part of the textbook, and each part editor is collecting authors, and I'm kind of the main editor. We're just at the early stages, but this is really exciting. So hopefully that will come out, you know, within our lifetimes. No, hopefully very soon. And I'm also highly connected with Virtually Connecting too. So I will be at the Digital Pedagogy Lab Institute in Vancouver starting tomorrow. We are virtually connecting from there. If anybody wants to connect with us, you can go to Virtually Connecting website and find out how to do that. We were also asked to think about the things that were interesting or surprising or frustrating, or and I just have a couple of minutes, so I'll just say a couple of things. The interesting, maybe surprising, but also frustrating things in my work as somebody who's trying to advocate or raise awareness about open is the resistance that I'm seeing in people to adopting open educational resources. And I think, I mean, a lot of it is lack of time, and that I understand. Okay, it's hard to find the time to revamp a course, to do new materials and things like that. So that I completely understand. But there's also some resistance that I don't quite understand, which is that they must be lower quality, right, than publisher materials. And I honestly don't get it, because even with publisher materials, as a teacher, I read through it. You know, I don't just assign it because a publisher made it, right? A big publisher made it. I read through it to make sure it's good quality, right? So you would do the same thing with OER, right? Let's say with an open textbook or any other open educational resources. Maybe sometimes it's because they know the person who wrote the material or something like that. But, you know, open materials often have good reviews, right? They'll have reviews, peer reviews by people who teach. And then you read through it yourself and you decide if it's any good. So yeah, I guess I've been a little bit frustrated and somewhat surprised by the resistance to adopting open educational materials beyond simply, you know, the real problem of not having enough time to revamp a course related to that. And then also the resistance to sharing your own materials. And that one, I really want to try to dig into that question more. I've done some research on open textbooks. I've published a couple of things on open textbooks and other open educational resources, and how students feel about them, and how faculty who've used them feel about them. And they're quite positive. And I'm hoping at some point to do some research on the barriers that faculty have to sharing their own teaching resources, because I'm curious what those are. Obviously I do a lot, so I don't have very many, but I'm curious. You know, I find it interesting and I want to know more about why others don't. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
All right, thank you so much, Christina. I'm so glad you're part of the community. It's such a nice connection, peer-to-peer, educator to educator, to hear what's going on among educators. As part of my work for eCampus Ontario, that's like gold for me to understand those perspectives better, so that I can support and keep the open invitation useful for educators.
Yes.
So yeah, thanks for all your work, and thank you for your story. And we'll move on to David now.
Hi, thanks for having me today to this little storytelling session. My story, of course, goes back a lot further. I've been doing this for a long time. I actually started in K-12 education and worked at Simon Fraser University in the 90s in teacher education, working with faculty and faculty associates and supervising the whole sort of rethinking of the teaching process that was happening in British Columbia at the time. And my role there was really to bring a technology theme to education and teacher education. And so we equipped students with really rudimentary laptops and ear-coupled modems and all kinds of really great gear way back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. That worked out really well. I ran a network called SFU Exchange then that brought experts like lawyers and people who knew about science into the open and into the sort of digisphere where people could ask them questions, and the university let us run wild with giving people access to accounts in those days so that we could actually promote the notion of a networked environment for learning. And it was really kind of cool. And we cost the university like literally multi-thousands of dollars a month to do that. But we had a wonderful VP academic at Simon Fraser University who said, that's what we're here for. That's part of our service mission. Just go do it. Don't worry about the cost. And we just kept doing it. And that evolved into the Ministry of Education looking at us and saying, hey, maybe this would work in really remote areas of the province where they've really been poorly served in the past, where education and learning resources and the real opportunity for kids to graduate, particularly up north along the Alaska Highway from Fort St. John right to the Yukon border. And we set up a project there called New Directions in Distance Learning to really push some boundaries around thinking about learning resources and interactions with teachers and sort of community-based aggregation of learners and learner support. And it was really quite successful. But again, it was really expensive, and in those days, the government of British Columbia was really cool and keen on the notion of doing these experiments, but not so cool and keen on paying for them over the long term. And so that great idea kind of went away. About the same time, the whole learning object idea came around, and so I was highly engaged in that and worked then at the Open Learning Agency, which was a distance education agency in Ontario. And we were part of a huge federal government project called EduSource Canada, which was the first cross-Canada collection of learning resources that was starting to be built around a kind of repository network with research components that went with it. And government invested $9 million in that project. It was pretty significant way back in 2001. But it was also a time where I was starting to really see there was just way too much technology involved in this. And what I was seeing that was missing was kind of a soul for this sort of learning environment and the rethinking of resources. Like, where's the soul in this? Like, it's one thing to do it technically and make it work. But it was another to actually engage people, to think it was interesting, useful, and beneficial to them, and building a community around it. And that was really hard, and I couldn't quite figure out what was missing. And I wrote a paper then called Object Lessons from the Web, 2001. I just put the link there for it. It's on a Penn State University site right now. And you'll get a sense from the tone of that paper that I was pretty strident in those days. It's like, move. And so it was pretty questioning of the way our universities were organized, particularly around how they use learning resources. And it wasn't very effective. And interestingly, I moved to the private sector for a year in that time period, precisely because the private sector wanted to objectify many of its teaching and learning resources. And in fact, our company was building for mobile phones back in 2001. Things we called nanobytes and learning nuggets and stuff we actually marketed to the public, like 5 things to think about before you go into a negotiation meeting. Stuff like that was actually fairly successful, but oh God, I couldn't do that forever. So I moved to I moved to the New Media Innovation Center, which was just one building over where I worked. It was a research lab run by our universities in the province and a bunch of big companies like Electronic Arts. And during that time period, I met David Wiley for the first time. It was 2001. And he came to NUMIC. And I immediately got the idea about where the soul part of this lived. And it was so refreshing that, hey, if you give stuff away, people may like it. And by the way, your reputation may just climb enormously from that process. So meeting David was a seminal moment for me. It was like, I get it. And so it was really interesting. In that time period, I was then part of a consulting group that was ramping up BC Campus for government. I was working for the Research Universities Council of British Columbia, and they asked me to do some work on this particular idea that government had for BC Campus, and it all kind of evolved from there. I ended up becoming the executive director of BC Campus in 2003 and hired as two of my first people, Paul Stacey and Scott Leslie. And both those guys were kind of totally vested in the same idea. And it was, why would the Crown own copyright for stuff they fund? Why wouldn't we vest it with the creators and ask them for a reuse license back? And so we started playing with some of those ideas in the early days, but we couldn't, like Christina, the resistance, Christina just noted, we were getting all that resistance then. It was like, no, it has to be only used within the boundaries of British Columbia. It's taxpayers' money from British Columbia. And so we wrote a bunch of licenses with Fasken Martineau's IP department, big legal firm in Vancouver, called the BC Commons licenses. And that was probably one of the worst decisions we ever made because we ended up having to kind of wean those back from institutions over time. And thankfully, people like Brian Lamb worked at UBC in those days. And there were people at UBC who really understood what we were trying to do and were some of the early pioneers in this province of actually giving institutional support for an idea of this type. We had an associate vice president on our board of directors at BC Campus at the time, and she got it. And just through her force of voice, we started to move things forward. It wasn't until 2006 that we started playing with Creative Commons licenses. And probably one of the best storytelling things I've ever seen happened at OpenEd 2009 in Vancouver. And it was, of course, Cogdog, Alan Levine, did a keynote called Amazing Stories of Openness, in which he had a kind of Hollywood Squares wall of video up on the front of the podium with all of these people like Martin Weller and Audrey Waters and people like that who he could just kind of push a button and they would tell their story. It was fantastic. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. And I always remind Alan that when I see him, it's like, that was the best. We got to do that again sometime. Around 2012, we realized after running $8 million of public funding through British Columbia's universities that we were getting lots of material built, but it had no cohesion. And so we really started to think, what would make it happen? And we saw what OpenStax was doing and decided an open textbook program really is what we should focus in. And I was very fortunate to convince the minister of the day that this would be really good public policy if she were to push for it. And so I built her a presentation, which is here at the link I just sent you, which she took to the Council of Ministers of Education Canada in summer 2012 to say, this is where we think we'd like to go in British Columbia. And I thought it was a bold step for her to take that forward. That was the year that the Paris OER Declaration happened, and I was fortunate to be invited to Paris to speak on behalf of Canada in that beautiful big auditorium at UNESCO about what was happening and where we saw things going. I remember the people who were also on the podium, Hal Plotkin, who I now know and lives in California. He was part of the Obama administration's pitch on open, and people from the European community who were there from Poland and Slovenia, who were kind of moving in this direction at that time. We announced that open textbook program in 2012, and it has taken off since then. Mary Burgess has done a fantastic job with the BC Campus team to move that stuff outward. And we're reaping the benefit of that now in Ontario by migrating that library to Ontario and now seeking to enhance it in a project with Ryerson University, with the Rebus Foundation, to build an open publishing infrastructure for the province of Ontario. That kind of stuff is what we need to do, and then share it back across the country as a kind of a federated model. I think one of the great things about openness is the sense of community that people get through being a part of it. And for me, that is a really important piece of the puzzle. And I've tried really hard while I was at Simon Fraser University briefly for a year, at BCIT for a year, to kind of ignite that thinking in those two institutions, and I think fairly successfully. So I'm pleased to have been a part of that. Also pleased to be going to Slovenia in 2017 in September. Just got an invitation for the government of Slovenia to come there and be a part of that event. And I think that the open community really has begun to take root. I mean, I can really feel it when I talk to people in Ontario now, that they get it. The Open Ranger community, the Helen DeWards, the Jenny Haymans, the Terry Greens, the people who have got infected by the bug are going out there and talking about it and bringing colleagues and friends along. And it's very much a gifting community, a gift of knowledge, a gift of friendship, a gift of community. It's really good stuff. And so for me, I'm really pleased to be continually a part of this community, from all the way back in the learning object days to the finding of soul to go with that, and now to see how that's vested itself in our kind of burgeoning community across Canada. And I hope we can continue to support it and make it move forward productively. That's my story.
Wow, David, thank you so much. I forgot to mention early on that I am very privileged to be part of David's team at eCampus Ontario right now, and even more privileged to be asked to be leading some of the open OER community building for Ontario at this time. Because as you say, David, and I agree, there's momentum, really strong momentum, and I'm feeling that in all of the stories, and all of the people that I talked with this week are feeling very engaged. And I know from time to time in the community, we can start to feel a little bit disengaged and a little frustrated and things like that. But I feel like there's so much positive momentum. And I just want to add one little thing from Rajiv Jangani was talking about you, David, and we were having a good laugh that he was going to present you as patient zero in the epidemic of open in Canada. And hearing your story, I can hear exactly why that would be true. And you know, I learned quite a bit about you that I didn't know, and I'm very pleased to know from hearing your story today, from hearing all the stories. So I want to thank you all very much for sharing your time and graciously sharing your stories. If there are any additional links to the things that you talked about today, please send them to me, and I'll make sure I post them with the recording of what we've done today. And there's Terry showing off the OEO Rangers badge. Yeah, it's really a wonderful time to be working at eCampus Ontario and working in Canada with such amazing educators as yourselves. So I hope everyone has a really great day, and thank you again for your time.
I'm going to the beach.
Oh, have fun, Terry. Have lots of fun.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.